Before SketchUp, before CAD, there was good old pencil and paper. Woodworkers would solve design problems at full scale, and maybe some would make scale models as a proof of concept, but typically there would be full-size drawings, which would lead to templates, which would lead to prototypes, which would lead to a final build. But today, it seems like woodworkers are pressured more and more to jump into digital spaces. Of course, CNCs are cheaper than they've ever been, lasers are accessible, so it's very tempting to get into that stuff, and certainly, digital design offers a lot of opportunities to work out problems before you ever step foot in the shop. That said, I still think some things are better done at full scale, at least for me. Now this topic is very timely for me because I'm actually doing some large-scale drawings for a project for a buddy of mine, a big table, and I got some angles and stuff to work out. And I was so excited that I decided to do a live demo for our Wood Whisperer Guild members. Now I've been doing these demos for a long time. If you're a Guild member, you've probably seen a bunch of them. But I wanted to bring it here because I have heard from so many people who are just tired of the attention economy and the algorithm making decisions about what you should and shouldn't watch, that they're just craving content like this that's just chill and relaxed and talking about the craft, going into a deep dive on something they're really interested in. So that's what I've got for you here is an excerpt from last night's meeting. I think you're really going to enjoy it. Let me know in the comments if you want more of this kind of thing, but let's get to it. The Wood Whisperer is sponsored by Woodcraft. Just get started. Just kind of going through a little bit of the history on this. I don't know about you guys, maybe depending on your age, this may or may not, this kind of ages me a little bit. In high school, I took drafting class, and I honestly thought I was going to become an architect. I just was very interested in the whole concept. I remember in 8th grade, my science teacher tasked us with designing like, not a smart home, but like an energy efficient home. And I think he had one idea in mind, and I had a whole nother idea. So I basically did a scale drawing of my existing house and almost made it look like a blueprint. The best I could at that age. And I think I added some stuff about the energy efficiency, but ultimately I was just flexing and trying to be an architect, right? So then of course in high school I took drafting and we were drawing like cogs and machine parts and stuff like that. And a lot of that stuck with me. It was a lot of fun, but I was bitten by the science bug and went in a completely different direction. But I think that's why this, ironically, as I'm scratching my leg because of the poison ivy, it scratches an itch in my brain, a need to draw some of these things and see them come to life at full size. Also, when it comes to these digital spaces, I don't know about you guys, but I do have a problem when it comes to ultimately deciding on proportions, sizes. Do these parts look good together? Should I make them a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller? There are times where I'll design something in SketchUp, think it looks great, but then I actually make it in person and it didn't come out the way I thought it would. I think we're sort of detached from the realistic perspective. So when let's say we're doing a table, typically you only see a table from a certain perspective from whatever your height is. Maybe you might be curious and you get down and look at what's going on there. But in SketchUp or most pieces of software, you can hover and move and zoom in and out, and you could view this thing in so many unrealistic perspectives that it's really hard to lock your brain in on what it actually is going to look like in real life. And I think that detachment is what makes it so hard for me. So there are just some things I have to do this way. So I got some fun pictures to show you here. So when this design was kind of concocted in my brain, I just didn't have what it took to get all the angles right, but I could get the very basic shapes into SketchUp. And then I put a top on it, and I just wanted to see if I can kind of get the idea across because I needed to get my friend's approval on this table. I wasn't 100% sure that this is exactly what they wanted. So here's what I came up with. You guys are gonna love this. Look at that. Now I put the SketchUp guy, that's, by the way, when you open up a new SketchUp file, that's the standard little dude. It's sometimes a woman, it just depends on what year it is. But that's Mr. Hipster Man. He looks like he wants to serve me a really nice cup of espresso. But that's the table that I drew. I wasn't worried about anything being truly scaled correctly. I was not concerned about everything being proportioned correctly. I just needed to get something on, that I could take a screenshot of and send to my friends. And that sufficed because it actually gave them the info that they needed. But it certainly wasn't enough for me to build from. But that's pretty nice, right? I like that. But here's the cool thing. We are in a time now where technology exists and we have tools with some of these AI programs that we can use that can kind of fast forward things for us a little bit. So I was like, you know what? I wonder what would happen if I took this sketch screenshot, 3/4 view from SketchUp, and said, hey, ChatGPT, can you hook me up? Let's make it out of walnut. Let me see what it would look like if this were a real table. This is what it came out with. I was surprised, delighted, and disappointed all at the same time. So this was remarkably close to the direction I wanted to go with this piece. While this really was good to give to my friends and say, hey guys, what do you think about this design? And it kind of solidified the job. It did not necessarily give me the numbers. And that's what I needed. I need the numbers. Because without the numbers, I can't build this darn thing, right? So that brings us to drawing. I have to figure out a way to do this because again, I could put any angle I want in SketchUp, but man, it is just not gonna tell me on a complex leg that's got this L shape that has to be at an angle that's then at a 45-degree angle, and it's all gotta fit under a particular tabletop size that they specify. I can't figure that out in SketchUp, so pencil and paper it is, right? So when I have to do things like this, of course, you have to get your initial idea out of your head, whether you do it in some kind of real crappy way that I just did with SketchUp, or you do something as simple as like pencil and paper. I know you guys probably can't see, the lighting might not be great. I just kind of did a napkin sketch of what I was looking for. But you got to start somewhere, and you have to have a frame of reference. So now I actually had that ChatGPT image here on the bench when I started to go into this process because I wanted to see if I can come as close as possible. Even in that 3/4 view, I could still kind of get an idea of what was going on. All right, so when I do large scale drawings, I need certain tools, I need certain materials, and it kind of depends on what I'm doing. In this case, there's no curves, right? So you guys know I like to do a lot of curves. So when we're talking about curved work, there actually are other tools. We're not going to cover those today. This is kind of just relevant to this particular project, but understand, of course, if we are talking about curved forms, whole different set of tools that are going to be involved. So let me show you what I got here on the bench in front of me. Really important for something like this is a T-square. It doesn't have to be a big fancy one like this. In fact, sometimes I like to use my big drywall square for things like this because it reaches all the way across this table. But this one by Jessam is one of the new ones that has like the fancy sword name and these little tabs that pop out. Anyway, really cool. T-square is good because I want to maintain a square reference surface. So once I start to draw, if I draw a line, I know that that line is going to be sort of a future reference point for me. And if I'm parallel to the edge of my table and I run my paper along the table like this, I can just use the edge of my table to start to draw things. Okay, so that's always a good idea. Of course, combination square, you know, this is good for anything in woodworking, right? Of course, but we also can use it just to pull the ruler out. Or what I find to be even more handy, because of course this has a thickness to it. So when I'm trying to be real precise in something and I've got it down on the surface and I want to make a real careful mark, that could be kind of tricky with this guy. So actually, good old fashioned, cheap Office Depot clear ruler is fantastic. Clear is important because it helps you see other parts of your design, whereas this is going to obscure other lines in your design, right? So one of these comes in really, really handy. Of course, a nice steel straight edge and ruler. So of course, you know, the measurements are important, but this is an edge that I could draw up against for a nice straight edge. So that's kind of obvious. Tape measure you may or may not need, just depending on what you're doing, but there's always a good chance that that you could use something like that in this case. Now, because we are doing a lot of angles on this one, I am bringing out some of the angle tools. I've got a bevel gauge that's going to be indispensable for starting on an angle. Sometimes I'll just use it to draw the beginning of an angle, and then I can use a longer tool to draw the rest of the line, or I may just use this as a bit of a guide to set up a longer straight edge like so, and now I can draw a much longer line. But the bevel gauge is going to be important, and you're going to need to know what angle you're at with that bevel gauge. So this happens to be a woodpecker's what would you even call this thing? It's like a bevel. I'm going to call it a bevel hoochie. It's got all the different measurements that you would need from 0, and I guess it also depends on your orientation, right? Which side you're measuring from. But it will do any angle you really need to do, and it's perfect for setting your bevel gauge up to a line like so. And a lot of times we're going to draw things, make it look good, and then try to figure out what that number is. So if you can set this to whatever you drew, then you can come back over here and be like, all right, which line was that? Okay, that looks like it's about 40 degrees, and you can start to get some hard numbers. I've got some early, this, I believe I even bought this in high school. So this is good for finding angles, drawing angles. You really can't get around having a decent little protractor. I actually surprisingly don't use this all that often because I do have other ways to find angles. Not just find them, but then draw that angle. And I think that's where some of these other tools come in handy. Something like this will help you do that. You can draw and find the angle very easily. And this is totally unnecessary, but it's a tool that I happen to have, and boy, oh boy, can you get precise with the angles. This is the Starrett, it's basically for the miter saw, but it's a miter saw protractor. And this allows you to get really, really specific as you start to draw things like that. And because you've got these nice reference surfaces, I could put that down, find an angle, and again, same thing. I could use it to draw directly, or I could use it to kind of line up a longer straight edge like this. So all told, this is kind of the bank of tools that I'm gonna wind up using. Oh, you know what I didn't mention, you guys? Pencils, my gosh, silly boy. You want a good quality pencil, of course. I've got some of these really fancy ones that draw real well. You don't really need too fine of a pencil at this point. We're just designing big shapes. What I'm gonna use today, because we're on brown paper, you guys won't be able to see this really well. I'm gonna use Sharpies. So my lines are gonna be real chunky, real big, but at least you'll see them. At least I hope. So I'm gonna take you through that initial process. We've got this table we need to make. What do we know? Well, I know the width, I know the length. That's not gonna help us here right now because really what I wanna figure out are these darn legs. How tall are they? What the heck are the angles that we're gonna go for? It's clearly gonna be a two-piece construction. So at what point do you change from the top piece and then connect to the bottom piece? These are all variable. And I'm gonna tell you right now, there are probably a couple hundred variations, if not more, that we could pick that would all look okay. And I think, where we hone in is where we put our personal touch on it. So I'm gonna probably wind up drawing a couple of them here. The question is whether you guys will even be able to see the difference between them. If I just change 5 degrees here, 5 degrees there. I notice the difference when I'm looking in person like this. I don't know if it's gonna translate, but I think that's besides the point because I think we need to get close and then you refine it as you go and hopefully, ideally, work your way into prototyping. And I think I saw someone in the chat mention something about miniatures and doing quarter scale. That's also a great way to kind of see how this stuff works. And I think if you want to take the time to do it, can give you a more accurate answer than using something like SketchUp because it just, again, the physical item does something different to our brains. All right, so first things first, we have to figure out what we know. And what do we know at this point? Well, I know that tables are usually, 28 to 30 inches in height. So this is something if you are building for a client, if you're building for someone in your family, you want to ask them. Tell them to sit at all the tables in their house. Tell them ideally if they have the chairs that are going to be used with the table you're building, you would say, can you use those chairs? Go up to different surfaces. Let me know what height feels the best to you so you can make it perfect for them. And not everybody is the same. I like my tables a little bit taller. I've got some tables that are 31 inches. It's just what I prefer. If people are a little bit taller, they're over 6 foot tall or something, maybe they prefer a taller table. But 28 to 30 is where we're going to go. My friends happen to be on the taller side. I mean, they're not giants, but they're definitely on the taller side. And with the chairs that they have, we all sort of decided that 30 inches was probably a good number. So if we know the top of the table is at 30, and you got to know the thickness of your tabletop, I'm going to probably aim for about 1.5 inches. This is going to be more of that bulky sort of look. I don't know that I want to go to 1 3/4 inches, but I'm probably going to have to get some 8/4, waste a little stock, and get it down to 1.5 inches. So if I'm at 30, and I take that 1.5 inches away, we know the bottom of the table is at 28.5 inches, right? So all we need to do is measure up from the bottom here, 28.5, and that's going to start at least getting us into the ballpark of having something to work with. All right, so I'll put a mark over here. Now, just so you know, a lot of times I will do this work all the way to the end of my assembly table. I can't today because I've got a laptop and other stuff involved here. But if it's all the way to the end, I can come in across this way with another square and just strike my line for that 28.5. But for the purposes of what we're doing today, I'm just going to make a second line here, and then I'm going to draw across. Just by connecting those two lines. Now, if you are trying to figure out what kind of legs you want to make, you want to give yourself some space, right? We don't need to just put our leg dead center here. We could start over here and do 3 or 4. And in fact, I can't get them right now, but I have a couple other versions of this where I have 4 or 5 versions of my table leg that I'm trying to play with here. All right, so what now? Well, we certainly could begin doing things like this. We simply take a pencil, and you're not going to really see the pencil line, but we could start to mark in roughly, what is this thing going to look like? Where does my eye think this transition from our bottom piece to our top piece should be? You know, largely I'm going with my gut here. Is that looking pretty good? And then I could even start to pencil in a little bit of width to my pieces. I know the way this is going to go, they're going to be skinnier here and get fatter as they reach, I guess we'll call it like the knee of the leg. And then once again, it's going to be thick and then get thinner and taper down at the bottom. So what is all that going to look like? The pencil will just kind of help you get where you're going. And it may not be perfect, but it's going to get you a little bit closer, right? So at that point, if you wanted to, maybe the pencil's not giving you enough information. Well, these are templates. Let's pretend these are just pieces of scrap wood. You can also just take some scrap pieces that are very roughly cut. They could be totally oversized and throw those on there and just kind of look, step away a little bit, look at it from different angles and see what happens if I go more upright. Is that what we're looking to do? Probably not. If I go really steep. See, with design, for me personally, it's about finding those extremes and then working my way in. I know this is wrong. I know this is wrong. So I must be somewhere in here. And here's where your couple hundred right answers exist, right? So don't be too hard on yourself because there is more than one right answer. But I think we can all agree where the wrong answers start, right? There is definitely a range. So a couple things that I do know when we talk about this mid-century modern, we know that a lot of times our legs are at like 15 degrees. That's usually when it's just a single leg going from the tabletop down to the floor, about 15 degrees. What we have, and I'm cheating here by showing you what the actual leg looks like, but I want you guys to have the right frame of mind. This L-shaped leg is definitely not that. Right? So we have a much more severe angle than 15 degrees here because we're going to go out and then we're going to come right back in. So that's a different number. And that number tends to be more like 30 to 35. And I think if you stay with 30, that's on the, well, to say 25 to 30 is a little bit more of a conservative structure. It's going to be a little bit more upright looking, probably would be sturdier just in terms of forces that are applied to it. If you go above that, you start to get to 30, 35, even 45 degrees. You'll see some designs out there that do that. Now you're asking a lot of that joint. You're really putting a lot of pressure on that joint, but you are also talking about a more exotic design, a more statement piece, if you're really going for that drastic number. So knowing that and just kind of looking at the pictures that I've seen, things that I think are kind of pleasing to look at, I honed in at about 30 to 35 degrees. So when I'm drawing these, I've drawn multiple versions and I've drawn them at both 30 and 35 just to see what they would look like, right? So that's one number I have in mind, about 35 degrees. Another number is how far up should we go before we make the turn? So we've got a longer lower piece to our leg and we have a shorter upper piece. So we definitely don't want it to be in the middle. We got that 28.5 span, so we don't want it at 14. We want to go above that. How far above that? Well, this is where my kind of hand sketch comes in. I kind of just looked at what I drew roughly and I go, well, every time I draw this, it's coming in at about 18 inches-ish, roughly 18. So there's a good number. Let's just go with 18. So let's look at 18, which is right there, somewhere in that area. So this is just oversized. I'm just making a mark that tells me where to stop with one of my lines here. Okay, so if that's at 18 inches, that's about where, let me just double check, did I do that right? Yes. That's about where my bottom leg is gonna stop. Let's go with what do you say, 35? You guys like 35? I like 35. I find my bevel gauge. So on this guy here, I'm just looking at 55, 50, 40, 35 right there. Oh my gosh, it's already set at 35. What are the chances, you guys? Okay, so we're gonna go right here. So I've got this now set for 35 degrees and I'm aiming so that I hit my other line. I told you I was gonna use Sharpie, so I'm gonna use Sharpie. Of course, my bevel gauge is not long enough to reach there, so this is what I was talking about before. I could set that for approximately 35. Once that's in place, now I can draw in that first line. Of course, if you're using pencil, it's so much better because if I don't like what I just drew, I could erase it, right? Hard to do that now. Down here, the next decision we need to make is how wide the foot is going to be. Now, this is something that can vary greatly depending on the look you're going for, how sturdy you want it to be, how delicate you want it to be. And I've kind of teetered between 1 3/4 and 2 inches at the bottom. But given the span of this table, by the way, this is going to be like an 84-inch long table. It is going to be pretty substantial. I figured let's err on the side of caution. Let's make it a little bit wider. And I went for a 2-inch leg down here. So I'm going to go for my mark right at the bottom. And for those of you who are metric, that's millimeters. Right. So here's now where the leg is going to start my next line. So only 2 inches at the bottom. But where do I go up here? How wide is it going to be up there? Well, the truth is, I don't care how wide it is, because very typically, at least from my experience, things I've read about this, a 5-degree difference is going to get me generally where I need to go. So if I'm at 35 now, if I go and set this, would it be 30 that I need to go for? There we go. So now, 5-degree difference in the correct direction. So, and I also will write these numbers as I go, by the way. So I would put a 35 here, and now we know that this one is 30, 5-degree difference. So where does it end up at the top? I don't really have to worry about that so much because I have my sizing down here and I have the angle I want. It's going to land where it's going to land, up there by the, we'll call it the knee. Right? So now to my eye, that's a really nice ratio between a 35 to 30. So if you're doing work like this, a lot of times if you have this like tapered angled leg, that 5-degree difference is kind of magical. It works for a lot of things. It does the trick for me. All right, now this one is a little tricky to measure out, but that's where I tend to use this guy. So first things first, let's look at what would happen if we came off of here at 90. Okay, so a lot of times that is something to look for, because if you can hit 90, that's great, because that's a nice easy number to think about, right? So imagine coming straight off of here. Let's use some stuff to just kind of represent what that would look like. We would go 90 degrees. I mean, that could work. That would be something to try. What I start to see though is I don't want my top to overhang the furthest part of the foot too much. And if I take a straight line up, I could start to see that actually if I stay at 90 degrees, I'm probably going to protrude out above my foot, and that just doesn't look right to me. I kind of want it to be just a little bit inside. So for me, 90 degrees doesn't work. So I went through a bunch of different numbers. I tried, 100 degrees, 105 degrees, and somewhere in that ballpark works just fine. So if I take this guy and I put that at 90, hold on just a second. All right, so that's 90. And then I add 10 degrees. So this is now at 100 degrees, let's say. And this is where the tools, I don't really have the best solution for this, but I'm going to come off of this line. I'm going to intersect with my point here, that 18-inch height, and the line that I just drew. And then now I can draw this portion of my top section, like so. All right, and I think that's looking okay so far. I mean, if we were doing this for the first time, we would just be guessing and hoping that everything's gonna turn out okay. We won't know until we're done, and we may decide it's trash and not use it. I know for a fact already that this is a leg that I actually think is okay, that would work. So, another decision to make. We're gonna meet the underside of our table here. How wide do we wanna be there? Well, again, it's the same decision as the bottom. You could go the same as the bottom. You can go a little narrower than the bottom. It's totally up to you. It really is only going to impact the way that this taper behaves, okay, and how much surface is in contact with the top. So for me, I just decided to keep it at 2 inches. I don't see any reason not to. So I quickly can mark my 2-inch spot. And now again, Here's a case where we just don't have anything to worry about when it comes to angles or measuring. We measured that 2-inch point, and then we have an intersection point at our 18-inch line. Basically, this one wrote itself. Boom, there we go. That's a pretty decent head start. Oh, and I would probably, right here, just so you kind of know, when you do stuff like this, write your numbers down. Because what did I do? 100 degrees? So if I were to redraw this, and I'm going to save you guys the trouble, I don't think it's really worthwhile to do it because they start to all look the same. I would be checking different things. I would try 30 degrees instead of 35. I might try 40 degrees, see what that looks like. I would try 105 degrees, 110 degrees, and see how that interfaces. And you'll start to see they do look pretty different. And it's a good idea, if you got other people around, bring them in to look at it. I actually took my mom in here and I said, hey, I've got like 6 of these things to look at. And at first, she looked at it, you know, just being a non-woodworker, she's like, they all look the same. But then once you start to point some stuff out and you could show where, you know, is there overlap from the top to the bottom? Is it, you know, tilting back this way a little bit? Is it a little bit chunkier than it needs to be? All these things make for like, you can usually find 1 or 2 that look the most pleasing. The real question though, and the question we won't know, is what does it look like in real life? We are just drawing a shape. And even when you get to this point, which is where I took that shape, I took those numbers, now that I had actual firm numbers, that's something I can draw in SketchUp. I know how to make this shape and then give it some thickness. So I can actually make our true leg if those are the numbers. And then I could rotate that leg up and turn it 45 degrees, and I make a reasonable facsimile of what this table is going to look like and try to see what kind of problems we might confront in its construction. I can even, there's a great plugin for SketchUp, Face SVG, that works really well, where if you have a basic shape, you could take the face and then you can export an SVG file and then use that on a CNC or laser, whatever you want. So I was able to quickly laser cut these. Of course, if you don't have a laser, and most of you probably don't, got it over there, but you can't see it. I got a big piece of 1/4-inch MDF. I've used 1/4-inch Baltic birch or whatever. Honestly, the cheapest stuff is the easiest for this because it's just templates. So you have this information. It's not like you just drew magic and you can't redo it. This is all structural numbers and measurements. You could take all this information and you could transfer it to something that you can then cut out and make your own templates from. Some might argue that doing it on paper is a waste of time. Just do it on the plywood in the first place and then you already have your numbers. Thing is, it's easier to erase, and I don't mind using marker on this. I could just kind of trash it and put some more paper down if I don't like it. So I like to work it all out first, and then I would put it on my template stock and then cut it out manually. But if you're lucky enough to have access to CNC and laser, you might be able to do something like this. All right, so once we're at this point, that's when we can start to prototype. And what I wound up doing was taking just a bunch of old 2x4s, gluing them together to get the thickness that I needed, and I was able to construct what I have today. It's actually finished up today. I made 4 of these guys, and this is just 2x4s that I had sitting around, some you know, Doug fir, and I think this is some from our garden bed project, Western Red Cedar. And this is, you know, here, let me step back a little bit for you. It's looking pretty good. Now, I don't really know how it's going to look in the final piece, though. I don't have all the other pieces and the rails. There's so much. I ran into some really interesting geometry that I was not anticipating. And I'm going to answer some questions for a little bit because that's the main part of the demonstration. But I do have a little bit of a preview of the craziness that happens when this guy is tilted and you want to connect this to a rail, except for you want this leg to be at 45 degrees to that rail. And what happens to the geometry when you go to make a cut here and attach a piece to it? Because it is not as simple as anyone might think. It certainly wasn't as simple as I thought. Maybe you guys are all smarter than me and you know that it's not going to be that simple, but I didn't, and I found out the hard way, and I have some fun examples that I could show you if you guys are into it. But let's look and see if we can find some questions. All right, here we go. From Michael Plant, do you keep your full-size drawings like you keep offcuts? Yes, I burned them. Good question. I very rarely keep full-size drawings. I mean, Typically a full-size drawing generates something else eventually which might be worth keeping, a template, right? Or even in this case, a full-size drawing eventually leads to a very accurate SketchUp model, so I don't have a need for the actual full-size drawing anymore. That said, I do have a couple of old full-size drawings that I've kept around, and I don't know why. They're in a file cabinet area in the office. Has anyone tried taking a SketchUp file and get AI to render it, then ask AI for measurements? Okay, so you saw what I did. I already explained. I have gone through that process. We are not at the point that at least from what I've seen, that the sort of generative AI and these large language learning model things, they're not really that great with the measurements yet. There's stuff that I can't talk about yet that I'm getting involved in that might improve some of that, and it's super exciting, but it's just something I can't discuss at this point. But there may be a point where that is absolutely possible. Not maybe, it's happening. It's gonna happen, it's just a matter of time. Okay, Greg, any reason to go to SketchUp rather than just finish the design analog? Yeah, I mean, if you wanna generate templates, of course we can cut these ourselves, but if you have the skill set and you have the laser or the CNC, I got this done in like 5 minutes and they're perfect. Right, there's no question about it. I don't have to figure out, okay, get my track saw to cut this, then I'm gonna take that to the miter saw and cut that. There's a lot more to do it manually, so there is absolutely a reason to. Also reproducibility, archival reasons. You just don't know in the future. If you come up with a design and you wanna iterate on it, there could be good reasons to just have some kind of digital representation after the fact. But a lot of it comes down to your own workflow. If you know that you aren't going to need those things, then why put it into digital space? But I do find that the digital space can be helpful for discovering problems, right? So I'm out of questions for the moment, and maybe that's a good time to show you the problems. I'm gonna emphasize that these are problems, because boy howdy. All right, so check this out. This is one of our legs. My assumption, just in my brain thinking about this, you go, okay, we're gonna turn this 45. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make a cut on this piece, right? So this cut is gonna be perpendicular to the horizon. It's gonna be straight up and down. I'm gonna make a cut here. Then I'm just gonna simply bring my side rail in and everybody's gonna be happy and we're gonna have a beautiful joint. The problem is things don't work that way when you're talking about these angles that we're working with. So first things first, I'm gonna connect this piece to this piece and it's gonna be a 45-degree joint. So think of it like a miter or two bevels coming together. When we do this, we can't just necessarily pick an angle. We have to actually have the right angle, pun intended. If this is 45 degrees, then we would cut our rail. This is just, by the way, a stand-in for my 3.5-inch rail. You gotta split that 45, which is 22.5. If you do any other number, you actually can change the size of this surface here. So let's say we bias to one side or the other. Well, one piece is gonna present a wider face and the other piece is gonna present a narrower face, which means these two can no longer be the same thickness. So to keep them the same thickness, the first thing, and this is, a lot of people, this is kind of common sense, but it was something that I wasn't thinking too much about. But to keep these the same thickness, you have to bisect the angle. So the 45 has to turn to 22.5. So this rail gets a 22.5 bevel on the end. This guy gets a cut, which I said was 90 degrees to the horizon like this, but it also needs to be beveled like that, also at that 22.5, right? So all is well, okay? So we think. We put this guy on here, we go boom, look at that. So imagine if this were, I don't know if the angle is really helping you here, but the leg is pushing out at 45 degrees just like we wanted. This rail is going exactly the way that we wanted, but uh-oh, there's a problem. Here, look at this side. So that 3.5 inch, right there, look at that. I think, man, that looks perfect. It's joining right where it needs to be. But the uh-oh comes in, and I gotta flip it around again. Do you see that extra material above and below? There is some extra meat there. Right? It's the nature of the way that these two pieces are coming together. You're just gonna have extra meat. So I go, Well, fiddlesticks, what am I going to do about that? The only thing that comes to mind is beveling this piece. So if I strike the line on the top of this, I strike that line across here, I could just take this to the table saw, match whatever angle that is, and just bevel the top and bevel the bottom. The problem with that was I didn't like the way that it looked, because I'm going to have some kind of cross pieces that go between the two halves of this. In fact, you can see in the ChatGPT image. ChatGPT put them at the end of the thing, but on mine, crap, you can't see it that well because it's so darn tiny. But I'm gonna have interior pieces that go between those two rails. The bevel it wasn't making me happy. I didn't like it. So then I thought, how do I transfer, and also, by the way, I'm not really, you can see that 22.5-degree cut to take this guy didn't really remove that much from the leg. We got a lot of meat there to play with. So I started to think, how do we transfer the problem from the rail to the leg? And let's see if we can solve it at the leg. Well, we can. We can if we cut a little bit further in. We don't change the angle. We don't change the 22.5 at all. We just cut in further. So check this out. This piece, same cut, same angle, but can you see how much more surface area this one has now? All I did was cut in a little bit further, okay? So now on this one, what we've effectively done, I'm gonna put the leg and the rail in the same exact positions. Now you can see on the side that's facing you, that inside 3.5 inches, we nailed that. But look at where the extra is now. The extra is in the legs, not in the rail. Top and bottom, we have that dog ear extra material. So now the proposition is, what if we take that line and we draw that line right across here and put the taper in the legs? Now in the legs, we have an opportunity because we don't have to take that taper and just go right all the way down. Same thing here, you gotta do it at the bottom too. You don't just go all the way down, because if you did, you'd really thin out this foot. We don't wanna do that. So instead, what are we gonna do? We're gonna do a tapered bevel. So we start at that full width, but then it tapers all the way down to nothing at the end. It goes to a point, right? Now, if anyone has seen Jory Brigham's furniture, the Hank chair is a perfect example. That arm on the outside has one of those tapered bevels, and he does that quite a bit. And it's kind of funny, and this is not saying, I mean, he's a brilliant designer, so that's not what I mean when I say this, but sometimes with design, you can kind of put pieces together and you get presented with a problem. And good design can sometimes just be a clever solution to a problem. So I would not have thought of, let's put a tapered bevel on this piece until I saw that there was something in the way, right? So I had to think creatively about, how do we get rid of it, but how do we do that without sacrificing too much meat on the legs? Well, we're gonna do it with a tapered bevel. Now, I'm just kind of working through all the numbers and getting through this today. I don't know for sure that that's exactly what I'm gonna do, but that's where my head is at right now. But you could see how interesting that is. The first version put the pressure on the rail to lose material, whereas when we go a little bit wider, it switches to put the pressure on our legs. And actually, when I sketched it out, I thought it looked pretty darn good, and I'm kind of happy with the way it's going now. So I think that's gonna look neat. And when it's all said and done, it almost is like, oh, what a cool feature to add that extra little bevel there. What a lot of people wouldn't realize is that actually just solved the problem. The problem of joining these things at some weird compound angle. Let's see if we have any more questions, because that is about all I got for you guys in terms of pre-done stuff. So Michael Plant again, do you use any of the proportion guidelines from By Hand and I or similar? So George Walker he's been around for a while. He's one of the co-authors of that book, or maybe, I think it's him and Tolpin, isn't it? George Walker has had a blog for years. He taught at WIA many, many times. And he was the first design-focused woodworker that I actually understood. Because any other time when people start getting into golden ratios and Fibonacci, Hoochies, and things just start to get real complicated real fast. And I just wouldn't necessarily be able to wrap my head around those things. Well, George Walker talks more in terms of classic forms, whole number ratios, and things along those lines. I have internalized so much of that into my design, just in general. For instance, when we're talking about these angles, if I were drawing a bunch of different angles, maybe I did it freehand, right? And I go, oh, that looks pretty close. Then I take the measurement, but the angle is 36 degrees. Am I gonna stay with 36 degrees, or am I gonna maybe see what 35 looks like? because I know I'm going to do variances of 5 degrees from my two bottom angles. So if I know the difference is going to be 5, I probably want something that might be more of a multiple of 5, right? That just makes sense to my brain. If you're doing things like doors and you got a 2-inch rail and you're thinking about certain spacing, you just think, okay, if there's another event point that happens, I'm looking at even numbers now. So a piece of molding might be just a 1-inch piece of molding. Or if you start with something that's 3/4, you might be looking at 3/4, 1.5 inches. You start to think in multiples that are whole number ratios of one another, 1 to 2, 1 to 3, 1 to 4. So I haven't actually read that book, but I've followed a lot of his teachings. I suspect there's a lot of that in there, and I have found it to be a game changer in my confidence when I have to pick numbers. And I have to, when the sky's the limit, I could pick any number out there. Why not pick things that are multiples? If it doesn't make a difference, if it doesn't make it look bad, why not pick something that is a multiple of something else already in the project? So that's why I typically look for what are my fixed values. If I can find the things that I can't change, and that's my starting point, then everything can build off of that. Now, if we have to deviate, we deviate. But ideally, we use those whole number ratios as good starting points and then pull back where the project dictates. Does that make sense? I still need to actually read that book. I just haven't had a chance. All right, well, look, I really hope you guys incorporate and aren't afraid to do these full-size drawings in your work. I do think, I don't want to say that there's a stigma. Like, I don't know that it's at that level, but I do think there's a lot of pressure with 3D printing and lasers and CNC, all the crap I have in that room over there. There's pressure to learn this stuff. And if you want to, good. It's a very powerful tool. It will set you up for the future, especially if you're young. This is something you probably want to get into. But at the same time, nothing beats full-size sketching and full-size drawing and then getting prototypes if you have the time to make them. Actually, like, it just makes you understand what you're doing rather than taking some guesswork and then having some really unpleasant surprises when you finally build the actual thing. And that has happened. And it may not even be a big deal. Like the thing that you notice, you go, man, if I could do it again, I would make that 1/8 of an inch smaller. Small little details. If you look at the work of like the Green brothers and then subsequently Daryl Peart, and you start to look at certain things where he makes a decision where, 5/16 is just the right amount of reveal, right? 5/16 because 3/8 wasn't good enough. Like, or a 1/4 inch wasn't right. Like they have these, they just have an eye for it. And then when you look at their work, sometimes that's the thing that sets it apart from the rest, is you see those little details and that little bit of iteration, right? So I think the more you do this, the more you do full scale, full size things like this, the more you can train your brain to see the problems. And again, if you can make that happen digitally, all the power to you. It's going to save you time. It's going to save you effort. You can be comfortably sitting in a chair at a desk if that's what you find fun. But don't be afraid to do this. Get the right tools, get the measuring devices, the angle finders, get all that stuff, get a big old piece of paper, and have fun drawing things to scale. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. All right, so if you made it all the way to the end, thank you for watching this. And I would love to know if you like this kind of content, because I can certainly do more of it. If there's one thing I can do, it's talk about woodworking. So seriously, thank you. And if you really enjoyed this, you may want to check out the Wood Whisperer Guild. We have over 80 courses. And if you buy a course, you get access to these live meetings and the entire archive of live meetings. And maybe you don't want to purchase a course, but you want to get a taste of what's going on in there. We have Guild Stream, which is basically just a monthly subscription where you get to access 2 courses each month, but you get all of those membership benefits as well, including the live meetings, including my Grain of Truth videos that I do, usually about once a week, where I give you some behind the scenes stuff. I do some ranting, a lot of fun things in the Grain of Truth videos. Anyway, if this is your jam, head over to woodwhispererguild.com or twwguild.com or the woodwhispererguild.com. We got a lot of domains for it. But anyway, head over there. That kind of support really means the most to us. We don't make a ton of money on ads these days. Most of it comes from the Wood Whisperer Guild stuff. So thank you for your support. And if all you do is watch these videos, thank you for doing that as well. All right, see you later.